Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Majors and Quinn Facebook page for another virtual reading. My name is Annie. I'm the events coordinator at Majors and Quinn Booksellers, which is an independent bookstore in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We're very excited to have three poets with us tonight to read some of their recent work. And we are going to have them each read a little bit of their work, and then they will all come back on screen and have a little discussion, and they will be answering questions if you have any. So please, if you have questions for one or all of these poets up here on screen, type them into the comments under this video. We can see them, and we will be going through them at the end, and we can't wait to hear what you have to say. So let me just give you a quick introduction to our three readers tonight. We have reading first Paige Hill Starzinger, who will be reading from her new collection of poetry, Vortex Street, which was just published in June of this year. And we're very pleased to have this virtual event happening because Paige was supposed to come to the store in person. So we're excited to finally be able to do this and celebrate her new collection. We also have David Baker, whose most recent work is Swift, New and Selected Poems, and Peter Campion, author of 4 collections of poems, Other People, The Lions, El Dorado, and One Summer Evening at the Falls. And we are going to be hearing from them in that order. All right, yes, thank you for your comments. So first, to kick us off, let's hear from Paige and her collection, Vortex Street.
Thank you, Annie. Minneapolis is dear to my heart, and so are Peter Campion and David Baker, and I'm so glad they're joining us tonight. I'm going to start with the first poem in Vortex Street. Like the rest of the book, it looks backward to family, and it looks ahead to a world without a child. It whirls together different strands like a vortex. In this case, biology and personal narrative. Else. Go back to the beginning of the beginning, and the darkness filled with 1 million eggs. Cilia beating their microscopic hairs in the fallopians. Almond-shaped and pearly gray, ova yolking nucleus to an odor sperm might sense. Every month, tumbling out of my body. Something to do with not trusting myself, this childlessness. Something to do with squandering what I'm given. And here, one must find gentleness. The owl of Minerva spreads its wings only with the falling of dusk. My father says to me, by way of Hegel, about something else entirely. We must soldier on. Send me the bonbons, they'll get me through to the end. Who else have I lost? Black apples. Dropping to the red earth, these, the night-bearing difficulties of the 21st century orchard. Thrashers calling family from spindly fruit treetops, reminding me of the usefulness of dead branches. Orange haze over town, lights mingling with planets, planes, and stars. Micrometeorites raining down more or less continuously without melting. My father thinks I'm his wife, and my mother has no idea who I am. At least she asks. Oh, she responds when I tell her, you have a daughter and a son. Not sure she knows what those are anymore. Haloperidol is prescribed for his agitation. Look it up. Also for alcohol withdrawal. Geez, if only we'd known long ago, though he never would have taken it. But what if we hadn't done what he wanted always? Nothing more than bits on fire, but they were us. This year, a new cloud was recognized, apocalyptic waves, as if a roughened sea seen from underneath, asperitas for short, because no one hangs around for long. In this book, the narrator revises her story throughout, and in this next poem, she does it most directly. The title is the letter O plus the letter O, and that's echoing XX, the female chromosomes. It's also echoing the ovaries, the pair, among other things. Oh, likely it happened in a different way. It's a story I can rewrite. It's my story. I can rewrite it. There are things to see clearly. A, I never went out of my way to have a child. B, the endometriosis was severe. I lost an ovary, appendix. C, I had choices. Others took them, plural. People can and will adopt. Grief is something to revise or to sit with quietly. Try to sit with quietly. Even the quietly is difficult, itchy. See, I am fearful of something going in my body, afraid of not taking proper care. This is not going well. I'd like to end as soon as possible. Ooplasm is the yolk of the ovum. Germinal, nutritive, paired and the ovaries suspended, tethered by ligaments to the peritoneal cavity. These are facts one can start with. Well, the next poem is called XX. And if you think about these two poems, XX and OO, in the same book, you might think of the shorthand for kiss and hug. And actually, the writer was thinking of that, thinking it's a message to the narrator. It's a message to herself. XX, told to be self-aware, nice. What comes to mind is flaw. The word 700 years old, it first meant flake of snow, spark of fire, fragment gone astray. On Facebook, men say it's okay to use our father's name, but not our mother's. No way. It brings us ridicule and embarrassment. And gradually, over time, her name is forgotten, only mother of the oldest son. Flake, from some low German fishing net, wattled hurdle, frame, or rack. And ethicists want to set up inherent limits on how much humankind should alter nature. So we scramble after Canada snow geese during molting to harvest fallen feathers for harpsichord quills. Drifting through Earth's atmosphere, scattering light through imperfections, small crystal facets, supercooled, complex. No two. Isn't that nice? The same. The last poem I'm going to read is a song about balance, and it's called Vocal Balance. Did you know the earth hums? As in a vibratory body responding in harmonic likeness. Perhaps because it expands and contracts slightly all the time. Or perhaps it's just the slap of ocean waves. We don't know yet. Above me, the sound of feet pacing on the ceiling, gray and sooty, overcast, as if the inhabitant likes to swing a pendulum and has a plan. Facing the mirror in front of me, seeing not myself, but my mother, a cellular song, braiding and unwinding around a moment, this and many others, ensorceling, as much about arrival as anything else, as in old Occitan Achibar, 11th century, language of troubadours, en sursalle. When John Cage visited an anechoic chamber, he expected silence, but heard two sounds, one high, his nervous system, and one low, his blood circulation. We are ambient, though. My spinal discs cantilevered irregularly. I read that mountains are shaped as much by erosion, raindrops even, as by tectonic plates. It is most certainly the end of something. Tell me, my matrilineal, mitochondrial DNA, what are the stories embedded there? Is there a way to hear what's coming? Even the clef, the pitch of the stave. Thank you again for being here tonight. Please go to Majors and Quinn online and buy a book. It doesn't have to be mine. Find a book that inspires you, that makes you dream, that you've always wanted to support independent bookstores and support Minneapolis. Thank you.
Oh, that was beautiful, Paige. Thanks for those poems. And to Annie and the bookstore for inviting Paige and Peter and myself to read. I guess I'm the pickle in this sandwich in between these two. My name's David Baker. I'm going to read two poems, I think, from a new book called Swift. It's new in that it was published about a year and a half ago, but only 3 weeks ago in its first paperback edition. So it feels new to me. And indeed, please go to Majors and Quinn and find that book or any book and support that good bookstore in Minneapolis. So I'll read, I think, 4 or 5 poems. I'll watch the time here to see. I'm going to start with a poem called Peril Sonnet. I'm starting with this poem because I heard today, a report from the World Wildlife Federation that had been in the making for a long time, was released today, that reports 2/3, 68% of the world's wildlife has been eliminated in the last 50 years, since 1970. We have killed 2/3 of the animals on this planet in 50 years. Peril Sonnet. Where do you suppose they've gone? The bees, now that you don't see them anymore. Four-winged among flowers, low sparks in the clover. Even at nightfall are they fanning. Have they gone another place, blued with pollen, stuck to their bristles, waiting beyond us? Spring dwindle is what we call it. Collapsing neonicotinoids, high level in pneumatic corn, exhaust, loss of habitat, or disappearing disease in the way of our kind, so to speak? What do you think they would call it? Language older than our ears. Were they saying it all along, even at daybreak? The news is not good anywhere, is it? I've been thinking about my friends out west in Oregon and Utah and California, all of which are burning and burning and burning. I'm going to read a poem that I guess sort of echoes that image or that story. It's a poem called Belong To, and it takes phrases from that old song from the Duprees from the 50s. You belong to me. You know that song? Yeah, this is for Peter. You'll recognize this song. I can't believe I'm doing this. You know that one. So it takes some of the phrasing from that song. The song begins, see the pyramids along the Nile. Belong to. See the pair of us, raining and morning, the first soft ashes, along the high road, running the far ridge of pines, ripped wild to timbers by storming, to shreds, see the white shreds, like coals, like a sudden sorrow, see the partial moon, see the cut sky, see us, serene with singing. Are we merry? Are we rueful? Neither is there sufficient wording for what falls. All the muffled horns pleading, but too late, along the last route of what remains. Can you see us? What can you see there? Lost leaves, waiting to come back as leaves. So I'm going to read 2 or 3 poems I've never read, very new poems that I've never read before. So we'll see how this goes. Even more challenging, this first one. It's a hard one to hear. It will probably be a hard one to read just because of the phrasing. It's a poem about COVID, about this virus, COVID-19. It's called 19 Spikes. There are 19 couplet stanzas of long lines. The stanzas are incomplete. The lines are incomplete. The voices turn one into another. It doesn't have a kind of coherent teller to it. But it comes from a basic idea. The first time I saw a depiction of the COVID virus, you know, you've seen that picture, something went off in my head. I realized I'd seen that before. Just outside my window, my viburnum bush had just started to bloom, and that bloom looked exactly like the COVID virus. And everywhere I looked, I began to see that form repeated in nature, in sweet gum balls. I began to see it in things we made, in those naval mines that the submarines leave with the spikes on them to blow up ships. This poem is about the likeness of that form over and over and over and over. It's about illness and viruses. I have a bad one myself that I have to deal with. And it is about things that recur, like a barn. There's a man who dies in a barn in this poem, and a barn is also a form of measurement. All that stuff happens. I tell you that because the poem's hard to hear. 19 spikes. My doctor says when I have flare-ups of this virus, he said, "Oh, the storm is coming on, isn't it?" 19 spikes. Then the storm came. It raked our world with terrible teeth, then dissolved like a calcium spike back into bone. I see what you mean, but your barn's not really a barn. Old lady just sat there, married to the guy 50 years. Wash your doorknob, your hands, triage your mail. I had a nightmare I was living my present life. Can't touch my nose. It's called resorption. What? It throbs like crickets in my ears. Your BP was what? No touching. COVID petals. She said, wash your hands. It took his body hours to work down through the corn, the quicksand weight of it. Her in her folding chair, him with a new auger for the bin he sort of spilled out. So the viburnum's full of little pink blooms, bees in orbit, with its spikes, its barbs, poisons, perfumes. Then the hail balls, jagged as kidney stones, and a foot of rain. Trees seem to blow up. Then the whole thing, whoosh. Some natural forms are so successful, they're viral. Calcium nodes on your clavicle. I see them everywhere. How small can they get? How big? Any size explodes. Is it gas? You mean the barn? Is it gas? A heat storm. One barn equals a non-SI metric unit of area equal to 10 to the negative 28 meters squared, or 100 femtometers squared, to quantify interaction of a nucleus with an electric field gradient. And branchlets are pithy, many-angled, winged, liquid amber stratifiluria, surrounded by rusty, hairy bracts. Looks like a tiny naval mine. Between 80 and 120 spikes, terminal barbs, a special form of moored contact mine, and equipped with a plummet. He fell right through. The spikes on the outer edge of the virus particles give coronaviruses their name. Sweet gum, storax, red gum, star-leaved alligator wood, limpet mine. In place of torpedoes, the silos carry 12 charges. I heard my heartbeat in my bones. A positive kill rate. Airbnb, missile silo fixer-upper now, swanky bachelor pad. Storm shelter, storage bin, your ultimate safe room. Each virus is a single pleomorphic spheric particle. Satin walnut with bulbous surface projections. I see what you mean. Wash your hands. Like that really helps. Leaves ripped clean off. It's coming back. I know. think I'll read one more. I guess one more current event sort of poem. I'm thinking of the undocumented people still in prison, still stuck somewhere, and we're not even talking about them anymore. And the children, whose children are they now? This is Hold Hands. We were in the trees. White curtains opened. Your shoulders in my hands, then your knees drew upward. Rain like petals there. Rain like breeze. Now the birds were in the trees, 2 stories up, our window where blowing leaves were level with our sheets. We were in the street. We were holding hands as hands were holding us. What hands there were where we were, in trees. Our children there as songbirds were. The hands where we were in the trees were holding us there where we were in the street. Please the rain to please the petals in the breeze like rain. Please to draw your hair along my hands. Your hands are holding us. Lines along the window lane are holding us in songs, as now the songs, the sirens in the trees, lines along the window lane, your hair in feathers where the children are, whose curtains singing, whose hands are holding us, who cry like birds, hold hands. The birds are in the trees, the birds, our children, there in cages, singing in the trees. So I think that's it for now. And I will say, again, I'm really grateful that everybody's here to listen to us on the completely weird little screens that we live our lives now. And again, thank you to Annie, and can't wait to hear Peter, whose work I have loved for a long time.
Thank you so much to Annie and to Majors and Quinn. It's really heartening to see independent bookstores staying strong right now, and it reminds me to make a pitch for David and Paige and other poets. We'll be reading next week on the 20th for Politics and Prose in tribute to Stanley Plumley, and I'm going to be there, even though the bookstores in DC and I'm in Minneapolis. I can't wait to hear them read and to hear Stanley Plumley's poems. On the 20th, David and Paige maybe have more details that they can give you later. It's a great pleasure to read with these two poets, and it's also an honor to be able to read with them and to be able to call them friends. The first poem I'm going to read is a new one for me. It's called Unidentified Animal. Unidentified animal. Just off the trail, just off the road, and running loud through brush from the left, before becoming sheepdog or catamount, whitetail or wolf, the animal was vector, force, in violence or flight from violence, with, was it dragged branches or pebbles, muck, teeth, and the sound swept like a claw, the high, thin hall of trail torn by some invisible bird's shriek, the 9 p.m. late summer violet, startled, was curtain crash of dark and light. So when the animal, fisher cat, coyote, scampered across just up ahead, turning for seconds, its human not human, form of the four limbs, body, neck, and skull, before it ran again, its eyes, night vision green, through brush and shadow, flared out in a tremoring balance, tremoring rhyme of difference, staring back and forth with same. In our no language, no one was speaking. I share my workspace now, my writing space, with my wife's workspace and my two kids' school space. They were both in school here today, and it's easy to complain about feeling claustrophobic, but in a strange way, wonderfully wonderful. And it reminded me that how much that kind of sharing of space is generative and has been generative to writing poems. So I'm going to read a poem that has my son in it, and it's called Securities. Beyond my father's distance and beyond his father's, back a century, my great-grandfather's desk in Cincinnati, how he must have cherished its distance from the power looms below and must have known the fierce precision of his nib on the accounts, pinning him down as sun leaked orange across the river, kept him from falling back there, and kept his wife, if this year she was home from the sanatorium, afloat in her complete edition of Browning, which I own, and kept his children bound to the education that would carry them, thank God, away from there. The desk. It must have been a roll top, maple, with locking drawers and blotter, ribbon of accounting tape, ledgers in which the loops and slashes must have borne, even through Palmer method regularity, his own peculiar animal impress. But across such distance, so much must have been. This morning, wrestling my son, I kiss his chest, then trumpet a tickling fart noise until he wriggles free and shouts again. What aristocratic privilege to squirm in bed like this. What sweet barbaric closeness of our skin. What solace and uneasiness to know, however long from now, however distant in the loom of office towers, underwater green at night, and wing lights on cargo planes, and glimmer from the squatter shacks under an overpass, one memory of nerves, tensed, then released to warmth in his rib cage, will flow from this. And then what solace and uneasiness not to know, and only to press my face to him again. I'm going to read a poem in two parts in memory of Terry Adkins, a wonderful American artist who died a few years ago and was a friend of mine. His art, his sculpture and installations often, almost always, had to do with some aspect of Black history. And so I've been thinking of his art a lot recently and think it really is an art for our times. But then I stop when I hear myself say that and think there's something so deep in his work that it's not topical, it's not rhetorical, it's not noise of the moment, and yet it speaks to all of that. And it is therefore art that I return to all the time. He died while working on an incredible piece for the Whitney Biennial. The first poem is a portrait, or an anecdotal portrait, and the second poem is actually a poem that he commissioned for an installation, which both poems reference. It's an installation. There's my friend Sydney. We've had so many animals in our poems that he knew that he was welcome. It's a poem an installation that had to do with John Brown's Harper's Ferry raid from 1859. And you'll hear references to that in here. In memory of Terry Adkins. 1, his shoes. This was before he died with his boots on. He was moving his studio, whole weeks, his milk crates, first edition tumor, not to mention exorbitant shoes, lay in our lobby. This was before his show at the embassy. Blow-ups of young men hanging from trees, but cropped, so just their airborne feet appeared. And the loop of Carmela reading Dante, love that spins the sun and all the other stars. All must have made his own interior sidereal cascade. Meanwhile, the shoes were not stolen so much as, como se dice, disposed of. The Academy's head maid had to apologize to Terry. No bullshit Roman woman weeping in front of him. But they were Gucci. And he threw his right arm, up into air. I saw him, half Lord of Amelioration, half John Stewart Curry's maniacal John Brown. Gucci vaffanculo. Before 8 billion days strode past, blank, blue, clear, staggered waterfalls. 2, bees. Wherever the assemblage reassembles, may there be this video screen surrounded by the hanging maps of Harper's Ferry, cell on cell down squiggled streets accruing round the arsenal. And may the whole screen be a clump of bees, because John Brown codenamed his raid the hiving of the bees, because the bees in their bee-loud glades in poems, straining honey sweet with time, stand for the state, collecting electrostatic drive to shatter, to create. Because when the hero madman hears his mother in his dream, her blonde fur molting black, he sees her conjure, sinuous from air, mirages of a fortress grown to wonder cabinet. Casements for starfish and wolf pelt, and from one, each time it's opened, comes his tenor's C-sharp, rip-tooth overtone. Because, oh, queen, where network cells chain families in their thrall, where madman and hero turn the same, turned meteor of war, he heard you command, bite down the wall. I was thinking of, again, of David and Paige reading from Stanley Plumley's new book, on his last book, And it reminded me I never had Stan as a teacher, although of course I had Stan as a teacher. If you were alert, you did. But I remember hearing friends of mine like James Hoke and Shara Leslie, who were his students, tell me that there was a kind of a catchphrase that was used in his workshops, which was, "Failure is the teacher." And when I first heard that, I thought that sounds right. That kind of sounds like if you at first you don't succeed. But over the years, it comes back to me almost every day. Unfortunately or fortunately, failure is the teacher. And this poem is about that. That's a shorter poem. Shadows of Willow Boughs. Over the backyard where the complex going up fronts on the frozen river, shadows of willow boughs pummeled in wind, so vivid for shadows, calligraphic slashes imprinting on the snow in ragged laterals, fling forward, then collect back into themselves as bell-shaped clumps, octopus tentacles down-slung before the forward lunge again, more greyhound now, more charger or the hungry lion. And I know my own projector judders this, my need to find some spell against despair, my leaden, oh no, it's going all in one direction. And the willows swing back on themselves the same, and spring again, squid, jellyfish, jaguar, printing on the snow. I'll just read two more poems. This first of the two is called Surf Drive, and it takes place on Cape Cod, where my mother lives and where I partially grew up. I haven't grown up all the way. So much is evident. Surf Drive. Back here, life falls for moments into place. The way a couple in the sands of time or ocean lodge, after their cries, might catch the thump, then stippled drain of surf and both feel reprieve. The past has led to this. Though there's the other falling. There's the snapshot saved for 10 years now. Flush with August sun, Stephen drapes arms around us, beams his mime of happiness, though he'll comb the bars that night to score the powder that he'll shoot to kill him. At the counter for fried clams and ice cream, a high school girl calls the numbers on the speaker. Parents and kids, somebody's walker, waves. I come back to the harbor where he lived and want to see him, want the bonfire when, though Sully had just died, then Bruce, then Brian, he brought me. Going off to college gift, the box he made, torn strips from the life and times of Janis Joplin, wrapping the wood. And all this vanishes, fast as the last long bar of sun following us on water as we drive. And I know it doesn't follow us and doesn't vanish, just is, a rolling round again, regardless, a repetition like a lesson, the foxglove, and look quick, the hummingbird. This final poem is called Dandelions. After the cling of roots And then the pock, when they gave way, the recoil up the hand was a small shock of emptiness beginning to expand. Milk frothing from the stems, leaves inky green and spiked, like blissed out childhood play turned mean. They snarled in tangled curls on the driveway. It happens still, the desolating, falling shudder inside. And then our neighborhood is only sprawling loops like the patterns eaten on driftwood. Even the home where we grew up, its smell of lingering wood smoke and bacon grease falls to a shell of lath and paper. But this strange release follows, this pure luxuriance to feel the pull of dirt again, sense mist uncurling to reveal no architecture hidden behind the world, except the stories that we make unfolding, as if our sole real power were the power of children holding this flower that is a weed, that is a flower. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Great.
Oh, there's the store.
Yeah, look at that.
Lord.
Yeah, I think there are probably people still on and watching. Thank you for sending all these great comments in. We can't respond for some reason the way this is set up, but we're reading all the little things that are coming in from everybody. Hi, everybody. We're seeing your comments.
Yeah, I just wanted to pop back on. Thank you, all three of you. That was, wow, that was great. I also particularly loved hearing this new stuff that you're working on. It's really cool to be able to hear things that aren't even, out in paper form yet in the world. So that was great. I want to remind people that you can ask questions. You are making wonderful use of the comments, and it's really great to see your reactions to all of this work. And just know that we can do some questions if you have them. So do that. And I think that the three readers wanted to just sort of chat amongst each other for a little while, maybe talk about their work and catch up a little. So I'll get back off screen, but I will come back on to ask some questions if you've got them.
Yeah, Annie, if you catch some questions, bring them on. But I've got one. I loved listening to both of you, and I noticed a phrase. I've always liked Page's poem, Vocal Balance. I love that poem. It's in my head. I've got it actually in my hand right now too. And I noticed, Peter, in your first poem, a similar phrase. You were talking about my favorite phrase of all of these poems, the trimmering balance, I think it was, right?
Yeah.
And I find that just a remarkably useful way of thinking about the rhythm that we try to find in a poem. And I wonder if either one of you would talk about that as an aspiration or as a quality for a poem, the trimmering balance. What might that make you think?
Well, I was thinking about that in listening to both of your poems, and I was thinking about that balance sort of formally in terms of and it's not just formally the way it affects me; it's emotional and intellectual. And one reason I was saying I'm honored to be your friends is not just because you're good writers and nice people who I like a lot, but also I think you're both involved in this project of being totally convinced and totally convincing us that thought and feeling are part and parcel, that they're the same thing, and that like Eliot says of John Donne, that the way I'm paraphrasing, I don't have the quote right here, that you experience the rose fully as intellectual thing as well as a sensation. And I was thinking about that balance, not just that mind and body balance, but also just the body levels of diction in your poems. And there are amazing moments in both, in OO and in your 19 couplets poem, your new poem, David. Both of those poems, I was thinking of moments where there's very precise diction, or diction that might be particular to a whole field of knowledge that I'm not entirely familiar with, but you make me feel familiar with. I think that's a kind of balance. This page maybe will pop back on, but
I don't know where she went there.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you. Hi, Peaches.
Oh yeah, I don't know.
what do you think about that? I mean, I think it's also balance between the reader and the writer, and in that balance between a regard between two different people in a work of art.
There we go. So I was thinking that I have the same challenge in life as in my poems of trying to find that balance. So I can write. I will start writing and I will just be off, and I'll write it and it just won't. It'll come and go, and I have to go back to it, another time, and then try to hear that balance. A lot of it for me is trying to hear it and get in that space where I can feel it. So the balance becomes, it is very much emotional and physical, actually. If I've had too much coffee.
Well, that's the thing that's so delicious about that phrase, because you would think that is a paradox, that those things don't go together. If something is trimmering, it's not in balance at all. And that seems like exactly the aspiration for a poem, is to try to find a point where, what does Rethke say? The shaking keeps me steady. The same thing, this trimmering balance. It's never stable. It's never static. But if you compose the poem, the line, the phrase, right, there is some kind of register of balance where you literally feel the shaking of the language and of the body and of the world. I don't know how to say that any more concretely. That's very woo-woo, but that's all because of that delicious phrase I wrote down. Also, I really love that poem about your son. Was that Securities? Was that the name?
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, that's a good poem, and it echoed as I listened to it with Paige's poems about childlessness and about her parents, and sort of the trimmering balance of family.
One of the things I noticed in Peter's work, I've seen before the contrasts, the privilege and the poverty and light and dark, but I'm noticing more how things are changing. One, the animal in the first poem is human, animal and not animal. The son is aristocratic and also barbaric. Their elements. It's almost as if something's shape-shifting, thinking of a balance or of things moving back and forth. There's like a shape-shiftingness to your work that's fascinating. You don't know where it's going until you're surprised.
Oh, thanks. Well,
yeah, that's all you can say.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, Annie, did you get questions that you want to bring?
Yeah, so I have a question here. It's actually kind of a good, maybe will be interesting to people watching, like a background process question. Do any of you do your work in audible formats, like, for example, Libro FM, which is basically an audiobook service that you can do that is similar to the big one, but helps you support independent bookstores instead? It seems particularly apt for poetry. I know for a fact that there are poetry options in audiobook form. Can you tell us a little bit about if any of you have had experience with audiobooks with your work?
Absolutely not. I have no experience.
Have you, Paige?
I don't record my poem. I can't listen to tapes of myself. I don't write audibly. I don't record ideas. except that they bounce in my head for a long time. I don't write quickly. I get some notion and I let the phrases repeat. I say them to myself. I rehearse them. I revise them in my head for a long time until syntax and line and at least the beginning of a poem is fairly coherent. But then I go straight to, to the keyboard and type these things out. I think I would be too rushed if I were to record my thoughts. Um, I wouldn't trust that velocity for my own work. I like impediment rather than velocity.
I love audiobooks. I listen to them all the time, and I love listening to them when I can sort of be as incongruous as possible. Like the first trip I took post-COVID was down to Colorado, so I was driving through Wyoming, listening to Marcel Proust, and I mean, in English, but I mean, so cheated a little bit. But I think that one thing that we're talking about just the sound quality in, I was thinking especially in Page's poems today, the quote, the Hegel quote, for example, and the way that that's set against the more contemporary idiom of the poem, and it's also complicated because the way the father says it is in its certain context. That statements in poems have acoustics. They reverberate in different ways, in different directions, like a room. David's a really good musician. I mean, he'll know about this. That you test parts of poems for their kind of acoustical properties. And I'm scared of listening to my recordings of my own voice. It's just like a flattening of experience, or it's like, oh, am I really that guy? And but I think it's probably a fear worth facing because, for me, writing out, like David mentioned, I work with a pen and pad and then keyboard, but then the real proof, it's kind of like when a kid takes a plastic pail up from a sandcastle and like, is that going to stand or not? It's when you read it, and does it feel right? So all that's just to say that technology of vocal transmission, thumbs up.
Yeah.
Even if I haven't used it.
Here is a question here. There's use of animal imagery in the natural world. Here's a question for Peter. Clearly you know the natural world well. What in your life gives you that intimate knowledge?
No, I don't. And you know what the funny thing is? The funny thing is, I think of Paige and David as poets who really know the natural world. And in fact, talking about proof of poetry, if I'm writing well, I'll say something terribly, I won't use names, but I'll say something sort of defensive, that I recently had a friend critiqued a poem of mine and said, it's just pastoral. Like, why would you do this sort of pastoral stuff? By which I think the person meant, like,
give me that name.
Nature poetry just isn't cool anymore. And and don't you know about global warming and so on? And at first I was sort of self-conscious, but maybe they're right, maybe they're right. And then I thought, first of all, that's not what the word pastoral means. And second, anyhow, apart from my defensiveness there, I think of them as, and it's it's tactility, it's the specificity. And I think it's also a sense, well, two things. There's a sense in both David's and Page's work that to write about nature, you go beyond, the pretty views and the things that we all love, and face the fact that this is where people live. These are the farms that people work on and are being bought out of, and having Monsanto take over and so on. And our regard of nature with nature is just the same as any other aspect of life, of politics or love relationships or something that is volatile and lots going on there. So I think of these two poets as kind of masters of the art. I grew up in the city, I mean, I'm a rugged indoorsman,
Well, so David's poetry collection was reviewed in the New Yorker by Dan Chasen. And I think that this is in the headline, that David was an anti-pastoralist. And I think, David, you kind of raised before you'd read any further, you were sort of like, what is this? Am I correct? Why don't you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, okay. We're probably about out of time. Yeah, I don't
Keep
know.
going.
I'm not sure what the phrase means. Sure I do. I mean, I was flattered, and it was nice. He was talking about the obvious condition of nature, which is that it's belated. Joy McSweeney calls this the Necro Pastoral. You know, the death nature. That a city is a habitat, that plastics are made out of nature things, that we can write about virtually any material in the world and see it as both natural and unnatural or human made. I think that's what Chasen was talking about. Can you be a nature poet and write about cars or chemicals? Yeah.
It's all interlocked now, the encroachments and
It always was.
Nature.
Yeah, it always was. There was never a pasture, the way Theocritus, depicts it. Anyway.
Well, here is one more question that is, I think, a kind of perfect one for our final question before we head on out here. And before we get to it, I'll just remind everyone who is still with us, thank you for being here, that you can get work by all three of these wonderful people on majorsandquinn.com. So just go to www.majorsandquinn.com. You can search by title, you can search by author, you can just click through the browsing section and look through poetry. We have tons of it. We're a new and used bookstore, so we've got a little bit of everything. And we really appreciate you heading over and checking out some poetry or anything else you might want today on the website. So here's our final question from Brian. I'm interested to know who you all are reading during these days of social isolation, etc. Are you revisiting writers you've been reading for years, reading new authors, neither, both? Let's start with Paige.
Both.
Yeah, so I'm reading Jory Graham's new book, Runaway, right now. I'm a big Jory Graham fan. Speaking of nature, I mean, she gets right behind to the life behind the skin of the leaf, behind the skin of the person. She's extraordinary. I think anybody probably who's interested in poetry at all should read all of her work. I like to go back and read from the beginning again all of her work.
I've been reading this crazy book by an Estonian zoologist and philosopher named Jacob van Uskel. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, who wrote in the 30s, called A Foray into the Worlds of Animals and Humans. And it has wonderful illustrations too, and it's kind of an investigation into what the life world or of an animal is like, including a kind of really small animal like a louse or a tick. And it's an amazing book. But also, I think whenever John Ashbery was asked that question, he would make sure to give like the trashiest possible answer, to be honest, like fashion magazines or, murder mysteries or something. I like that stuff too.
I'm reading the John Grisham novel that my mom was reading when she died. The last book she read. I'm reading John Grisham. I'm reading William Trevor's short stories because I think he's so beautiful. I've gone back to read Merwin out of a need for survival. I'm reading early Merwin and middle Merwin. I've been reading a poet I knew in the 70s in Kansas City who died very early, a fellow named Milton Smith. I've been reading him again. He wrote under another name. Mbimbe was his name. I've been reading Mbimbe. I've been reading Arthur Z's new, everything. Tons of new poetry, new and old both, Brian.
Yeah, good to see you, Brian.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Brian. That was a perfect question to head out on. Thank you to all of you watching who stuck with us. This was really amazing. Thank you for all your comments and questions. Thank you, Paige, David, and Peter for being here. This is wonderful, sharing your work with us. Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you, Annie. We will.
Thanks, Annie.
Thanks for doing all the work, Annie.
Yeah.
Just in here. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye, everybody. See you, Peter.